Hey, everybody. Jumping up and closing the door. Yeah, it's live. We're live. Okay. Today's 5 Watt Live is brought to you with the support of, well, you. Today is a Friends of 5 Watt Live on Patreon, the guys on Patreon, guys and gals on Patreon. So I want to thank everybody, and thanks for being here. I think Revolver Magazine used to do a feature with this title, and my good friend Adam Levy has been doing many ones on Instagram that are cool. So here we are. I've always loved these deep dives into our internal life. This is like attributed to lots of different people, but I think the first one that it's written down was Socrates that said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That seems a little rough, but I do try to take stock a couple, 3 times a year, see what I'm doing and see if it's aligned with my goals. And sitting and listening to music, that's been important to me throughout my life, but isn't really part of what my current life's about. So I was looking at what records meant a lot, and especially to my guitar playing and the kind of music that I played. So I thought we'd go through those together. And obviously, we're going to have a space for you added in. Bebe is here today with us, as you've seen. I asked him to share his picks with me earlier, and I'll share them with you. I've worked them into the script here later on. He did follow up with a secondary email because he reached out to his grandfather, who was a big influence. His grandfather's Pepe. And he said that his grandfather that Pepe played Jimi Hendrix for him when he was 5 or 6. I think I've said it here myself before that I didn't encounter Hendrix until I was a young teenager. And then it blew my mind. So Bebe's digestion of Jimmy at 5 or 6, I could see how that would be a pivotal moment. The playing in the intro was, of course, our good friend Jeff McElwain. He's playing his 64 Strat through the 5 Watt World Barber Electronics Burn Unit / Supersport, or BUS for short, overdrive pedal. Those are available on REVERB. The link is in the description. If you're international, go directly to David with an email to get it that way, because you'll save a ton on shipping and David can hook that up for you. I'm working on editing the video Yamaha's Electric Guitars and Basses, A Short History. I'm behind on that, so I'm not sure when we'll be looking at that. It won't be tomorrow morning, I can tell you that, boys. Check the description in the store for links for the t-shirts, hoodies, and hats and mugs. Remember, if you have a comment or a question here, put a question mark in a space and I'll go look for them periodically. As you know, you're tremendously distracting. If I'm trying to work my way through a script, working through things I meant to say, but I will pop back here periodically, so that and we have moments, I'll try to build in a little bit of interchange between us in the thing. So while I launch into my list, I want you to be thinking about, I'm going to do 5, but if you can do 3, your top 3 or 5, I will say that most people's response to this is usually, I can't narrow it down. And I think that's part of the exercise. I think trying to figure out, I think we can all do a list of maybe 10 or 20, probably pretty easily, but figuring out which ones mattered the most is an interesting thing. I've been spending the last, 48 hours thinking about it. And these are the ones that seem like the right answers right now. All right. So think about your list and go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll bounce over there and go through them. All right. I'm going to go through these in chronological order. That's a word, right? Chronological. I think that's how it's pronounced. And though I said 5, there's actually a couple honorable mentions here. I think I've got 7 slides. So yeah, anyway, here's the first honorable. I want to start with an honorable mention. There, that's better. John Denver. I mean, when I was a kid, everybody seemed to start on acoustic guitar. And everybody learned acoustic guitars. I know when Rick made his video about like the top 20 acoustic guitar intros of all time, people were like, how did you know those songs? How did you learn those songs? Rick's like, I learned those songs when I was 15 years old, because that's what we all did then. And that is what we all did then. And my mom was a huge John Denver fan, and she played his records all the time. If you note the 12-string Guild on the album cover there, and that's what sent me off to buy my first good acoustic guitar, being a 12-string Epiphone. Yeah, the 12-string parts on the John Denver records. And later on, I'd come across other 12-string players that I really loved too. It was interesting. So I always been thinking, I don't have one now. I torture myself with a mandolin if I want to have those kind of tuning problems. I remember that Epi was bought with, I've said it here before, money that I had from delivering newspapers and from picking apples. It cost, and I remember it like it was yesterday, it cost $225. It was laminate, everything, I'm sure, and rosewood. And it was just, I just thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. And I used that guitar to play in my church folk group. And then I took it off to college. And eventually the neck warped and it was done. You know, I'd say that that record didn't affect me that much. But it really is the kind of music that encouraged me to play and to sing at that time. And it's funny because I've said it here before, my family does sort of sing-along things. Get the camera straightened out here. And I'm reworking the family songbook right now. I'm in charge of the family songbook, as you might guess. And I just added about 6 or 7 John Denver songs because my mom's going to be 87. She's very spry and sings along, as does most folks. And so, yeah, I just added a bunch of John Denver. So that's my first honorable mention. And now, if I didn't lose all the bluesers, if everybody didn't bail, I mean, that shirt and the neckerchief is enough to lose everybody. So let me try to take that back off the screen. There, you feel better? There you go. All right. And then actually, I'm going to jump all the way to this record. I would say that this is the first record that really took me out of that folky thing. Oh, my logo's in the way. That reads Seconds Out on there. Is Seconds Out by Genesis. It was released in October of '77. It's the first live recording of that band with Phil Collins out front. Peter Gabriel had left 2 records earlier. And I'd bought a copy of, my first exposure to Genesis was I stumbled across a cassette in a discount bin of Wind and the Wuthering, which was the first record after Gabriel left, and the record right before Trick of the Tail, which was a huge record for me after. But I spent most of the time, frankly, listening to Wind and the Wuthering. And when I got to college, I had this really cheap, Radio Shack realistic receiver / cassette player thing. And I was very proud of that rig, and I would play that cassette, and my roommate was like, "Oh, well, I haven't set up my stereo yet, but I have all these albums." And he had all these great albums, and he had all the original Genesis records on vinyl, and he had Seconds Out. And it was him that kind of turned me onto it. I would tell you that I grew up on a farm, very quiet, and it was really hard for me to sleep in the residence hall. So the roommate had a system already. He was actually a sophomore transfer student from Oswego. He had transferred up there. Mike had transferred up there to do printmaking and printing, actually. And he would put a record site on, and that would be playing while we were trying to fall asleep. And as I was thinking about this live stream topic last night, I was in the other room. My girlfriend's like out in the living room, and without thinking about it at all, I was singing out loud. And if you know it, go ahead and join in. I played this earlier, and I loaded it up, me singing these parts, and the AI didn't recognize it. So you might not recognize it either. So I'm going to do this live. So hang in there with me. Walking across the sitting room, I turn the television off. Sitting beside you, I look into your eyes as the sound of motor cars fades in the nighttime. I swear I saw your face change It didn't seem quite right. And it's hello, babe, with your guardian eyes so blue. Hey, my baby, don't you know our love is true? You know, after 45 years, those words came into my mind unbidden. They were just there. I'd call that a top 5 influences. And though I didn't know it at the time, just as the album was being released, guitarist Steve Hackett left the band. They were actually mixing it. And there's this great story about how Hackett was walking to the studio to be there when they were mixing the tracks down that they had done. That record is 4 nights at the Palais des Sports in Paris. And Phil Collins came along in his car and he offered him a ride. He's like, no, I need to walk. And he turned the ride down because he was pretty sure that Phil, of all people, could talk him out of quitting the band. And he really felt like he needed to at the time. I love that story. And it was the other guys. And Steve got there and told the other guys. And then Phil came later and found out that Steve had left the band. So I would lay in the dark and I would wonder endlessly at the sustain that Steve Hackett was one of my earliest big guitar influences. And that was just an amazing sound that he had. And though now he uses a Fernandez sustainer in a Fernandez gold top, I think with a tremolo and stuff built into it. I just saw a rig rundown that the guys did that was fantastic at Premier Guitar. Back then it was a gold top Les Paul through a Marshall stack that was so loud that it just had endless sustain, and he'd do the whole Santana and Moonflower thing and get that going. His melodic sense and his impeccable timing, it still carries me away. And in the thumbnail, this record is not there because I don't own this, and I'm going to change that. I'm going to order it right after the stream. Everything else you saw there, everything else actually is going to be on the list today, is there. So the second record, take this off. Ooh. Okay, smooth as always. All right. Second record is Santana's Moonflower. These are probably in the reverse order. This record I found in the summer of between my senior year in high school and my college years. I worked in a record store. I actually worked in that record store on and off that next 2 years. And especially that freshman year in college, I would go home on weekends. I had a girlfriend at home. And I would work in the record store, and the guys found out that I worked in a record store. And so they were ordering all this rare, colored vinyl discs of Genesis and stuff. And it was fun. I was like this local celebrity record store guy schlepping records and money back and forth between the store. And the guy who owned the store was a guitar player in a local band. And it was a very low rent kind of an affair. And he had turned me on to Santana, because he knew I was just starting to think about playing electric guitar. I didn't even own an electric. I actually bought an electric the next summer, my Hondo Les Paul copy. Anyway, he turned me on to it. The churning Latin rhythms, I just remember like putting this on. I probably bought it on a cassette so I could listen to it in my car without having to copy it over. The Latin rhythms, clearly that it's a live record, and clearly the amazingly good time that the band is playing this music. And again, the soaring sustain that Santana got, that was very much like Hackett. You guys might have seen this picture before. This is a picture of me in my freshman year. And I'm playing, well, let me back up. There on Moonflower, there's a lot of amazing guitar playing. And I wouldn't say Santana's really a shredder, but oh my God, what a great writer. And there's a ballad on that record called Europa. And I could play along with that tune by ear, but there was lots of stuff there that I didn't know how to finger on the guitar. I didn't know, I'd learned how to play by ear. I didn't know a pentatonic scale, probably when I went off to college. And that picture is me playing my neighbor, Chris McGoldrick, from across the hall, his Tisco, which I'd go over and I'd grab it. It just had that one pickup up by the neck, and I'd plug it into that cassette deck. And I've talked about this before, and I'd overdrive the input of the cassette deck to get my sustain and distortion that way. And that's probably me. And that's not a Miller High Life there. We'll ignore that. Okay. Let's do Bebe's now. So Bebe said what a lot of people say, that to pick just 5 albums is impossible because there's so many more influences. And he says here again that his grandpa uh, turned him onto a lot of range, had an amazing record collection, and it was blues and rock. So Hendrix experienced and access Blues Love, prominent to him out of the Jimmy catalog. Albert King and Otis Rush album Door to Door, The Cars, I assume that's their first record, and XTC, English Settlement. It's interesting. I was talking to David Barber, as I often do, the other day, and he was saying, was talking about great XTC songs. And that was when I was in the jazz thing, was when XTC was on the scene. David's about 6 or 7 years, 5 years younger than me. And so he was way into the band. And I went and looked, and Rick did a What Makes a Song Great in one of their tunes as well. But Bebe wants to say here that so many would be left out by a short list like that. The Beatles, Stevie Ray, Bloomfield, Clapton, The Doors, STP, Soundgarden, Black Crowes, all of that. So that's our good friend Bebe, and that's the image we're authorized to use of Bebe. There you go. Are you guys loading up your? See, I can't look at this. Distortion plus sustain equals disdain. There you go. All right. You guys keep loading those in there, and I will come back. I'm going to cover a couple more here. I don't know if we'll go the whole hour today. I'm already through 2 of the records. This next one is an interesting sidebar that really wasn't in my plan at all. When I got to college and I told them that I wanted to study guitar, they seemed to hear me say, I want to study classical guitar, because that's what they let you do in the late 70s and early 80s in college. And that's what they were willing to give me credit for. But they did actually arrange for a really great teacher, a guy named Dennis Monroe, who played all kinds of music. And in the end, I would end up taking classical guitar lessons with Dennis for a number of years, but also banjo and like fiddle and mandolin. And it was his suggestion that I play the fiddle to bring me down a notch, because I was picking things up by ear pretty quick. And but Dennis also played the lute, and he played this. He had this beautiful custom-made guitar that was made by Bernie Lehman, who I think is still fixing and building period instruments in Rochester, New York. It's just Dennis was really eclectic, and I love that. He's totally my kind of guy, a real Renaissance guy, not in the musical terms, but in a broad liberal arts kind of way. And Dennis had me work through this book. I think they reprinted this with a new cover, but this is the version of the cover that I had, and I still have it. It's in the basement. And unlike my copy of the real book back on the stand there, where the cover is completely intact, this was living in and out of my backpack and going to lessons and stuff as a freshman in college. And it's pretty shredded up, and wonderfully aged. But I learned the tunes out of that. Like I said, Dennis was all of those things, but he was also a very serious classical guitarist. And he took me through that book. And at that time, I really loved this record. And I think Dennis must have recommended it. I can't believe that I would come across it on my own. And it's a live record, classical guitar duets that I had until I sold my records in the 80s. And then I ended up buying a CD version. When I got the CD version, it's a double album. I was very disappointed because on the original LP, there were bonus tracks. And one of the bonus tracks was an arrangement of the piano piece Oriental by Granados, which is just an extraordinary piece of music. And I ended up buying the record about 10 years ago just to have that one piece of music, even though I don't even have anything to play it on at this time. One of the things about that record, there's two funny things. One is that at the beginning of the record, it says, since this is a live recording, and I can't do the accent, Julian Bream, I think is British, and John Williams, I think is Australian. Julian Bream says, if you have an uncontrollable, since this is a live recording, if you have an uncontrollable cough, please wait till between the pieces. And then John Williams pipes in and he says, or at least the loud parts of the music. And then there's no clear interval before they start playing together. It's almost like they've done these pieces and they're at such a level that they just do the head thing. They just like one, and that's like the whole count in, and they just launch right into it. And I listened to that record for years trying to count, off to go into the first piece, and it just doesn't count evenly. And I remember being floored by that level of musicianship. It's a beautiful record. I encourage anybody, if you're thinking about dipping a toe into classical guitar, I think most players would recommend the Segovia recordings. And I grew up listening to Segovia records that my father owned since I was really quite little, because those records mostly came out in the 50s and 60s. But I really like the variety of music on this program with 20th century composers like Debussy and Granados, as I said. And I like the slightly more modern approach that Bream and Williams had. I remember a story with Julian Bream. I read in an interview once. He was playing a piece of music, and he said for years people were asking him for the arrangement that he'd had. And he said, finally, I was, I'm not going to butcher the English accent. He said that I was dating a woman, and actually I was dating a bird. And so she loved it. So I just played it from the piano music. So he just did an arrangement over the top of his head. And I should probably come clean here. I should admit, I cheated my way through my classical guitar studies, relying on my ear to play the tunes. My typical guitar player reading level, which is almost non-existent, I'd get my teacher to play the tune for me. And then the dots on the page would simply kind of remind me of where I was fingering wise, and I could still hear the tune in my head. And this extended to even playing in, Dennis put together a group with three of his students, and I was one of those students called the Rochester Guitar Quartet. And we did some rehearsals, and we did a couple of sort of country club-ish shows. And I was playing all those parts by ear. So, all right, let's, where are we? We're only 20 minutes in. I'm through the third record already, and we're going to look at some of yours, because that's where I thought that would make a good time. Let me roll back here. I hope you weren't too rough on my singing, boys. Perry is here. This is partly Perry's fault. He's always asking me what I'm listening to, and I really appreciate that. Victor's here. Adam Post says Foxtrot, which is an early Genesis record, is in the glove box of his car. Love it. Jeff Harper has a wonderful, diverse collection of stuff here. I like the Benny Goodman there mixed among the classic rock. Veronica's here. The Mills Brothers, The Ventures, Temptations, Simon and Garfunkel, Switched on Bach. Switched on Bach was a big record in my house too. Alistair says, brave. I don't know if that's a compliment. Brave guy to sing live. I'm glad you guys recognize Supper's Ready. I don't know if you sung along. I couldn't hear you. That's pretty funny. Thanks. I sent that clip. Oh, Perry says I sang it with a British accent. Yeah, I can butcher a British accent like the rest. Oh, I like that you guys were debating. David's right. You can't mention John Denver if you're a Zeppelin guy. Great. Yeah, these are great. I love I don't need to read these to you guys. I just wanted to get some of them here. A lot of Beatles. Love it when you guys are talking among yourselves. Andrew, if you're commuting, I'm afraid I'm a little worried about how you're putting things in the chat. I'm hoping that's a verbal command thing. Kevzilla, Dark Side of the Moon, Toys in the Attic, 2112, The Clash, and Back in Black. I got a lot of grief in the, where's it on? I guess it's on the telly video where I talk about The Clash. And the fact is that I said that the records are out of order. And they're like, no, the first record was The Clash. They didn't, did I say this here already? Did I already apologize for this year? They didn't release the first record in the States until after the second and third record did well here. So, Alien Hofo from Thailand. Welcome, my friend. Thanks, Perry. Perry said he never heard of XTC until the guys at that pedal show cooked him up. Kevin Kasmai, Oasis. The Verve, U2, and Mary is Coming. Great lists. Good stuff. You guys are still rolling in here. I'm trying to catch up. Yeah, there are some good Corona viruses. There's good people out in Rochester. That's absolutely true. Roy Meir says his first guitar was a $60 classical. You know, I'm doing that Yamaha piece, and I'm absolutely sure my first classical guitar was a Yamaha. I think, as so many people's were. Wow, Warrington is he's a hardliner. Guitar all the way. / Jimmy Page, / Jimmy Hammett Page Satriani. There you go. Terry, you can go back and catch the singing. God help you. Yeah, Who's Next is a big record. Wow, you guys are really pouring it on here. There you go, Adam. Adam Post says, proudly love John Denver. Yeah, I've kind of come back around to that. Yamaha student guitars for the win. Actually, Yamaha, old 70s Yamaha guitars for the win all the way around. I don't think I tell the story in the script because it's not really about acoustics, but famously, Neil Young is supposed to have written almost all of his biggest songs, the ones that weren't written in the studio, which he's also famous for doing, on an old Yamaha acoustic that lays on the floor of his bedroom where the strings have never been changed. So, all right. It's 4:29. Let me do my little Patreon spiel here. As you guys have heard me say before, Patreon, lets me build a community that is sort of a sub-community for within the broader 5-watt world. Because its founder was a musician, I think that a lot of the community tools are his top priority, even to the point where I'm not sure that they're always profitable for Patreon. And I like that it's being controlled by this group of musicians and not by the YouTube machine, by Google. I feel like everything is owned by just so few companies these days. And YouTube's given me this platform, and I'm incredibly grateful, to have a direct access where I at least get to talk live, even sing live. And I like that Patreon lets me step in to the side and have a direct connection with folks interested in what I'm making and the things that I think about and what I'm going to make in the future. There's 3 levels. There's $5, $10, and $50 a month. At the $10 level, you get early access to all the videos before I put them out to the rest of the world. At $50 a month, I schedule a monthly video call with you and talk about anything you're interested in. I find those are really wonderful calls, and they're great. They're really great connection for me. So if you can afford it, that's the most direct way to get to me. As I see in the corner of my eye at Top Chat, I'll come back to that. And of course, there's a context for the hoodies and T-shirts and stuff and beanies that's back there. So let's go back to that. And we're going to go back to the live. Let's go back and see Mr. Dooley. Thank you for the top chat. Appreciate it. No question? Here we go. Alistair's talking about his Yamaha. Okay. Okay, the next record. So my exposure to jazz started with a guide at the end of my hall on my freshman year in college, but I didn't really get pulled in deep until later on. And it was this record that did it for lots of people. Like I said, I kind of started my slide into jazz that first year in college. But as I was getting ready to leave college, it became pretty intense, and it became pretty much all I listened to for about 20 years. I used to joke that I had very broad musical taste, that I would listen to any jazz released between 46 and 64. I thought it was funny. It's interesting. This album is universally recommended to people when they say, I want to get into jazz, when they ask a jazzer, hey, what should I listen to? I want to listen to a jazz record. What should I get? This is the one that everybody tells them to get. And it's a great album for that. It's absolutely amazing. It's very accessible. The tunes can be played in the background, and they are. You can hear this like playing in a grocery store. Well, maybe not anymore, but you used to be able to. But it has depths that a lifetime of listening will not completely let you explore. When I played my weekly jazz gig in the late 90s, the band was called Miles Ahead. And I'd put this on for the 30-minute drive to the gig to sort of let me settle in, and frankly, to remind me of the level that we were trying to get to. The group played all the tunes on this record at one time or another. And I always started my solo to All Blues by quoting Miles's 3-note opener for his solo. Okay, no more singing. But I would always play that, and the guys in the band would kind of roll their eyes like, oh yeah, okay, he's going to quote Miles again. It's like a great blues record in that the tunes are very accessible, yet even to the novice listener. But when the drummer moves from brushes to sticks to a single stick, he's moving, he's doing brushes on the snare. And when the band's going to start kicking in, there's a moment where he moves one of his brushes. There's a fill, and he switches to stick, and he starts playing quarter notes on the ride. I don't know what it is about that moment, but it always gives me chills, and it still does. I've listened to this record thousands of times, and all those gigs for 5 years, 90% of the time, if I wasn't listening to a Pat Metheny trio record, I was listening to this, and it still made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That record started a multi-year Miles Davis listening project that included really all of his records, and it even led me to take trumpet lessons for a couple of years, which probably improved my music reading, better than any guitar work that I ever did on the classical. I said it before, if you listen to all the Miles Davis small group jazz recordings, you'll hear many of the most important players of the 50s and 60s that went through his band. Coltrane, Adderley, Bill Evans, Wynton Kelly. I mean, all these people ended up having careers on their own in a huge way, big influence. And if you add Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers into the mix, you pretty much get all the rest of them. They all went through that band too. So this records and the spin-off records that come from it is a great beginning for anybody's exploration into jazz. And it was a gigantic influence on me as a guitarist. It was me listening to Miles Davis play trumpet, the variety of colors, the melodic sense. Supposedly later in his career, Herbie Hancock tells this story that later in his career, Miles really very rarely played ballads like he played, when Kind of Blue was done. And one night, Miles had an infection in his hip, and it led to his drug problems and those kinds of things because he was on painkillers. He had an ongoing bone infection, and bone pain is incredibly painful. And supposedly, so one night, the band, Herbie Hancock was in the band, and they didn't know what he was going to play until he started playing. So they would just have to follow. And one night, Miles played a whole set of ballads. And when he turned around from the microphone, tears were running down his face. And Herbie said, what's going on? And he goes, I don't play that stuff because I love to play that stuff, and I need to take myself forward. So I'm a huge Miles Davis fan, obviously. And then when I got out of college, I discovered this record. This is Keith Jarrett's Köln concerts. This is the biggest selling solo jazz piano record of all time. And this story is pretty well known. But one of the great things about this record, it's completely improvised. It's an entire album of improvised piano music. Has a wonderful, serious dose. Well, it does what Jarrett does really well, which is stir a big dose of major triads into a world that didn't see them very often. And they feel like Americana. They feel like gospel. Go watch Rick's interview with Keith Jarrett, because he gets Keith to talk about that. And you can see that not enough people have talked to Keith Jarrett about that type, that influence in his playing, that folky kind of influence in his playing that Metheny had and Charlie Hayden had, and all these guys that had this kind of influence. Anyway, the recording for this, the person that was producing the date was a young woman in Germany, and she didn't have a lot of money. They barely had the money to have him come do the gig. And the rented piano that showed up was a mess. It was a Steinway Baby Grand, I think. And the lower register just couldn't be brought into tune. And the action was really stiff. And Keith really didn't like it. And then they, asked for another piano. They couldn't get it there. So we ended up having to play the show on this. So it's not just the biggest selling, and hence probably easy to say one of the greatest improvised piano records of all time, but it's Jarrett improvising on an instrument that was sort of fighting him through the whole thing. And it's just extraordinary to me that he's actually avoiding the lower register. He's playing a lot in the middle section. The lines overlap. You get a lot of melodies in the middle register. And it's just an extraordinary record. This record was, when I first got out of college, this record was a quiet place for me to go when I first got out of school. And I recommend it to anyone for that reason. There was another record by Keith Jarrett that actually I'd come across in college that wasn't really, in a way, a jazz record called Spheres, which is a double album of improvised pieces on a Baroque organ in Germany. And I can't tell you why, but once they taught me music theory, I can't write with music on. I can't edit my videos with music on. I can't have music in the background when I'm trying to use that part of my brain that hears that. There's that part of my brain that wonders, why that flat 9 chord, why did the melody go into that minor direction? It's the reason I love that Genesis stuff, is because he's kind of weaving in and out of keys. It's not easy to sing as I demonstrated, but it's one of the reasons the music is so satisfying. Is it's got this tension release stuff happening all the time. So I recommend that Köln concert record. And again, that's a record that you can put on and people might not immediately think, hey, this guy's like hitting me with the jazz record. So. I'm taking a minute here before the final record to look in the stream. Veronica says, Dave Brubeck's Unsquared Dance was my introduction to jazz. Cool. Yeah, it seems like a lot of folks really got this. Oh, Paul Lima brings in Steely Dan. That's great. Dan was big for me, but also Leonard Skinner and ZZ Top. Absolutely. Maggie Osterberg says, Miles is awesome. Kind of Blue is a whole world into itself. I play So What riff as a warm-up too. Yeah, so do I. Le Wolf. Miles did it for me. My first and favorite is Ascenseur pour l'échafaud, Elevator to the Gallows. I don't know this. I don't know this. You guys are showing me up here. I'm notoriously bad at titles. So I probably know the tune and don't know the title. Okay. Well, I think I've ripped through these, talking fast as I do. And nobody's going to be surprised by this last one. Everybody heard the ping? That was Lyle from Psionic Audio. I had a question before the stream started asking how he was doing. He says he's just out of bad cold. He's okay. He's just got a real bad cold, and he's about to reemerge. He said, makes it sound like he's a caterpillar. And I hope he's listening. We all miss him. Okay, so number 5 is obviously Robben Ford's "Talk to Your Daughter." This was released in 1988, and it's interesting. I couldn't have told you how I came across this, how I discovered Robben Ford. But like so many people, "Talk to Your Daughter" was the record that was my introduction. And now, as I think back, it must have been Beato, because I was listening to like all really straight ahead, piano, bass, drums, horn up front, kind of small group jazz. I've always been a small group jazz guy. I didn't play jazz in my high school jazz band, so I never got into big band. I've had friends who were drummers tell me that big band is the metal of the jazz world. Not for me. Never had that kind of energy. But it had to be Rick. I started taking lessons with Rick actually in '88. So the year that this record came out, I think in October. I think maybe somebody here knows better than me. And I remember I was asking Rick to show me all these different Metheny tunes, and he was using it as a way to teach me different chord voicings and stuff. It was great. Rick is, among everything else he's an amazing one-on-one teacher because he's a good listener. I did a whole video about this years ago, and I talked about it a couple weeks ago when we talked about doing lessons. The tone on this record, I'm going to remind everybody, Ford is playing his Fender Esprit Elite, which is a custom shop Fender guitar that they actually did put into production, a version of it, developed with him. It's a semi-hollow guitar with no F holes. He had been playing a 335. It's smaller and more compact, lighter, easier to play and easier to travel. And I think that probably everybody I know agrees that this is likely their favorite Robben album, but it's also their favorite Robben tone. It seems to be the time when he was enjoying the Dumble the most. He was using a Dumbulator, and he had a TC Electronics 2290 delay. Actually saw him, one of my earliest exposures to jazz. I saw him at Yoshi's, and he had that rig still before he gave up the Dumbulator and started using the Zen drive as his overdrive tone. And as great as this record is, and it's great, and it is in print. I double checked it on Amazon. That's where I got this image actually. I'd encourage everybody to go seek out the live recordings from this time, because they stretch on all the tunes. And, Vinnie Colaiuta played drums on the record, on the studio record, but Michael Beckenstein is in the touring band, killer as well. And that's a tough chair to sit in if Vinnie Colaiuta played on the record. But Roscoe Beck is playing 6-string and 4-string on the dates. And I just watched a bunch of them today when I was prepping for this, and it was absolutely incredible. Whenever I listen to Robben Ford, it reinforces for me the beauty and the subtlety of the blues. There's so much room and so much history that he's bringing to these tunes, and he still finds fresh ground all the time. I realize that he's mostly living in a real pentatonic world, but at the same time, he's always playing stuff that surprises me. And surprising me is what I'm looking for in an improviser. And everything Ford's ever done, I own. And I don't know if I said this. I should have said this. I got rid of all my CDs probably in 2010. And then I've recently, in the last couple of years, bought some, because I'm not comfortable with just streaming music all the time. I want to know that some things are just on the shelf. So I maybe have like 20 records. That's it. CDs. I have 20 CDs. And I bought a CD Blu-ray player so I could actually just sit and not have to have the internet connected to my listening experience. And this is really all, I can blame Perry for pretty much all of this, so that I can actually try to just sit and do that. I could have listed 20 more easily. We can take Robben off here. Other big ones for me were Ralph Towner, the solo records, especially the record he made with Peter Erskine. Al Di Meola, Elegant Gypsy was massive for me in my freshman year in college. Also John McLaughlin's Shakti acoustic records. I was talking to Rick the other day about how McLaughlin played stuff that was faster on an acoustic than I could ever begin to imagine on an electric. And I remember listening to them, realizing they weren't just scales going by really fast, they were ideas. McLaughlin was just incredible. And I know he toured with Shakti again recently. But I was also really into John Renbourn, the sort of fingerstyle guy from England, Doc Watson. But here's the problem. As I was working on this list, and it's not like this is a big realization as much as I just got to come to grips with it. And again, I can thank Perry for this. Most of these artists made their mark 40 or 50 years ago. That music from those lyrics from the Genesis tune, it was 46 years ago that I heard that tune for the first time. So I'm gonna go on a mission to come up with a new list of players that have put out records in the past 5 years, that warrant this level of attention, that weren't just sitting and just listening. It'll force me to listen and sit down and make it a part of my studying again. Rick did a great video years ago about what your practice routine is. And part of it is always repertoire, learning new songs, but also sitting and listening. Tim Lurch, when I have him come visit, Tim always reminds us to spend time listening. And if you want to learn how to write, he always says, learn tunes. That's the way to do it. So I'm going to go do that. And then I'm going to come back in 6 months, and we're going to do the show again. And we're all going to bring records that we have actually discovered in the last 6 months. Obviously, I can't force you all into this, but I think it's a worthwhile idea. There is amazing music being made these days, and I'll come back in 6 months. So what's that? October, September, and we'll see. And I encourage all of you to do the same, and let's do that in the fall. And let's speed up on the idea that all the music we listen to as kids is the only music that's important in our lives. All right. Okay. That's all I got. So Perry says he's getting blamed for a lot today. Well, it's not my fault. He's always telling me new stuff to listen to. Perry says it's not a competition, everybody. I've already won. Yeah, the good and bad influences. So Veronica says she's quoting Robben Ford. I'm sure that everything I ever improvise on, there's some miles. There's always some miles there. So, oh, it's great to see lots of other folks showed up. Shane is here. I never remember if it's early or late there, Shane. It's early, right? Crazy early in Japan. Shane's in Okinawa. This is very good. All right. So we got 10 minutes left. Are there questions? Any questions on subject, off subject? Perry usually asks me what I'm listening to. I've kind of beat him to that punch. So he's probably going to go Pizza or Henry Munster. I'm not sure. Phil Jones says, what? New music? Yes, Phil, it's an idea. New music is it's a concept. And I'm going to have to say that the music has to have been released in the last 5 years. Okay. PW LeBrun says, challenge accepted. I love it. Yeah, Perry's right. How could I not include Frizzell? I wouldn't say that Bill Frizzell was, I'd say he's an influence in my playing now. Although I have to tell you that whenever somebody says to me, I'm wandering my way through some chords on an acoustic or even on electric, they always ask me if it's Frizzell, and it's always Matheny. It's always me stumbling on Matheny and probably wandering more. Yeah, Shane's reminding me. Yes, it is. So Shane says, well, let's do them in order. So Kurt Schaffenberg says, if you are academically inclined, is being into jazz required? Kurt Schaffenberg says, I think that actually jazz went down a road away from being a dance music. It's as simple as that. jazz stopped being popular when it stopped being a dance music, when it stopped being a popular music. Because it's important to remember that jazz was the pop record music, was the pop music. I mean, if you see signs of 52nd Street, you know, old photographs of 52nd Street in the 50s, it's just row upon row of jazz clubs and beautiful, you know, neon signs and in black and white, you know, great images of that stuff. So I don't think so. I don't think it has to be dealt with at that level. You can really just deal with it at a quarter note level and dig down and feel that. I think that's really important. Shane says, thoughts on the Budget Strandberg? It's at 6 a.m. there. Thanks, Shane. So the guys at Strandberg had reached out to me and asked me if I want to be part of the launch for the new Essential guitars. There's a lot of things in those guitars that I've been asking them to do. And I love the fact that they are doing a guitar that is more reasonably priced. Although I don't know the prices off the top of my head, because as I said, I demurred and I wasn't part of the launch, because I still feel like I kind of owe them a video on the Strandberg Masvidalian guitar that I have. They're going to get them in probably at Ish. And so instead of having them send me one, I'm just going to go play the ones at Ish and I will report back, Shane. I can't believe that they're not as cool as they sound. One of the things I wish they would do is have a slightly less flat fingerboard. And they did not do that on this. And I'd love to see one. Tim Pearson, I talk about having one re-fretted with regular frets instead of stainless. Because I think a big part of what they're talking about as their Strandberg sound is coming from those stainless frets. And I don't love that all the time. So I might end up using my Masvidalian, which I love that guitar. I might now that he's left the brand, I could feel like I could probably have that refinished, or, you know, do some customizing on it and maybe have somebody refret it. I know a guy, Jeff introduced me to the guy to maybe refret that in an interesting way. Other questions? People are already recommending other music. Oh, Jarrett said he got to meet Jeff at NAMM. I haven't been able to talk to Jeff. We've been bouncing back and forth. Oh, Thundercat. Perry's recommending Thundercat. Peter LeBrun, could you say something similar about classical music? No. That's interesting. So with classical music was the popular music at a time, although I don't have a sense if it was ever, I don't think it was ever music, because it was orchestral music. I don't think it was ever music played in the common place. And I'm going to immediately correct myself. It's important to remember that until about 70 or 80 years ago, music was something that happened in the home, and everybody played an instrument or could sing or do something to help entertain the family. There was no internet, there was no television, there was no radio. Okay, maybe 90 years, 100 years ago. So people having a musician in the family was really important. And like it is now, music publishing was a huge part of the music industry, as publishing still is a big part of the music industry. And people bought sheet music and played it. I went on a Willa Cather reading binge last year, and all of her books are in the late 1800s. She lived in the 1800s, lived into the early 1900s. A fantastic set of books. The Prairie Trilogy is the Song of the Lark, O Pioneers, and My Antonina. Those three books are just extraordinary books, a glimpse into that world. And she has characters who play the piano. She has characters that sing. She has characters who actually, one of the main characters becomes a singer and then goes off and becomes a famous opera singer. So these were people that were really revered in their communities. So I think there was a time when classical music didn't slide into academia. And I think that's really important. Perry says, what would your list have looked like in the past? Like in the 90s, would there have been a different albums back then? It probably in the 90s would have been the same, the same list, which is kind of where I came to at the end of my thing, where I said, I'm like that. I'm going to go read the research on this, because there's a whole bunch of stuff written about why we list stuff, to stuff that we listened to when we were young. Oh, Gary says that the Strandberg site says that they're listed for $9.99. That's great. And they're being built in the same place that they're building all the guitars in Indonesia, although they have recently, actually have started doing guitars and more custom guitars in Japan, and they're going to be doing custom guitars at the facility, the True Temperament facility in Sweden as well. People are recommending music. I need this help. Perry says he wants to come back and do the best Golden Age classical recordings. Perry actually has a much deeper catalog, classical catalog than I. And although I have to say that Arvo Pärt would be somebody that I discovered since I've known Perry, and that's really important. That was a really important record for me, though I don't listen to it now. Brandenburg concertos. I encourage you to go listen to Keith Jarrett's recordings of those. Jeff Harper says, can old music be new music? You mean, can you discover music that was from a long time ago? I'd like to try to keep it be music that was actually new and recorded in the last 5 years as a way to kind of put some brackets around it. Oh, and Bebe jumps in. Of course, being the Bebe that he is, says Talk to Your Daughter actually was released in July, which would be the summer before I started taking lessons with Rick. So that makes perfect sense. All right. Any other questions here to wrap it up? Really nice to see everybody here. It was great to get the Lyle update while we were live. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to have Jeff play us out with that opener. And I thank everybody for being here. Thanks for listening. I was surprised at how well last week's stream did. So if you haven't watched it, go check it out. I spent a lot of time building it. And I love to intersperse the images and stuff. And it was a good conversation. So go check that out if you haven't watched it already. And I will see everybody soon. Barry wants to know, in chocolate chip cookies, walnuts, here or nay. That's so simple for me. And frankly, they're not brownies without walnuts. So there, that's the closer that we need. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Remember to use the links in the description for Patreon and for the store. And there's a link there for the bus pedal if you still don't have one. And I want to thank everybody for being a part of the 5-watt world and for being here today. All right. See you next week.